Hello, and welcome back to Baby Elias's stories. We now return to Blade Runner 3, Replicant Night by K.W. Jeter. Chapter 13. Miss Tyrell, over here! A voice came out of the darkness, the words barely distinguishable against the howl of the wind and the lashing of the rain. We're coming! The water, salt of the flow, mixed with ice crystals, driven from the dark roil of clouds above, stung beneath Sarah's eyelids. She shielded her face with one hand, holding on to the edge of the shaft's doorway with the other. The triangular structure bucked on the surface of the water, storm waves lifting and dropping the platform beneath her feet. The shaft itself, leading down to the Salander 3, strained with violent motion as though it might snap free, like a rope stretched to its breaking point. All the way up from the sea-buried ship, as the tiny elevator had carried her toward light and air, she had wondered if that would happen. If it does, she had told herself, I'll drown like a bug in a soda straw. That some kind of atmospheric turbulence was pounding Scapa Flow had been no surprise to her. The clouds had been gathering, growing more ominous and heavy-laden when she had first stepped onto the Orkney mainland. In sight of the old stone cathedral stuffed with its bogus monitoring equipment, and if the storm's fury had been unleashed while she was locked away in a little bubble of still time, that made sense as well. Given what Sarah had witnessed, the things she had seen, the past made visible and tangible, given all that, it would have been little wonder to her if this world's sun and moon had crashed together, with warm wood and the stars tumbling into the ocean like hot coals. Just hold on! The call came from the boat careening on the flow's dark, churning surface. She could just barely make out the silhouette of Wycliffe standing braced at the prow, while Zwingli behind him manned the oars. We'll be there in a second! A wave mounting as high as Wycliffe's chest slammed into the boat, nearly toppling him overboard. Zwingli's frantic rowing clawed helplessly at the raucous water. Just my luck, thought Sarah. The phrase had become the obvious refrain to the events around her. I would have been safer back down below. She knew that wasn't strictly true. As it was, she had barely escaped from the Salander 3 with her sanity intact. There was no way she wanted to see those things again. Once had been more than enough. The foam-crested waves struck the platform, a hammer seemingly more solid than liquid. Her fingers gripped tighter to the doorway as the impact tore at her, then passed, the shaft's tension snapping it down into the trough that came after. Here! Catch this! Wycliffe had mounted into the boat's prow again, a heavy rope coiled around his arm, one end of the rope fastened near Zwingli. He managed to synchronize his throw with the flow's swell. A knot and loop sailed through the rain. Sarah took one hand away from the shaft's entrance. Her hand missed the rope, but she pinned it against her side with her arm. It slithered like a coarse, wet snake, but she hung on to it, gripping and maintaining her balance as the platform rolled and tilted beneath her. She looped the rope over the projection of the doorway's broad hinge, just above her shoulder, then used her weight to draw the line taut to the boat. "That's it!" A crevice had opened up in the storm clouds overhead, enough to let a thin sliver of moonlight onto Wycliffe's face. Rain coursed across his brow and eye sockets, then into his open mouth as his chest labored with the unfamiliar exertion. His fanatic loyalty to the Tyrell Corporation and its human emblem was all that kept him standing in the small boat, his hands tugging at the rope. Behind him, Zwingli had pulled the oars alongside himself, turning where he knelt and grasping his partner around the waist, securing him against the next wave to hit. The boat swung around and hit the edge of the platform broadside. Wycliffe leaned down and forward, catching the raised metal lip with his fingers, straining to hold the boat tight against the force of the water, drawing it back. "Miss Tyrell!" His drenched face looked up at her. "You must!" The words came out as gasps. "Jump!" She let go of the rope, getting to her knees, and then half falling, half scrambling into the boat. A smaller wave tilted it. Her back struck the other side, sending a quick stab of pain up her spine. "Are you all right?" Zwingli had grabbed her forearm and pulled her next to him. Sarah nodded. "I'm fine." She pushed her sodden hair away from her face. "Let's go." "Wait a minute." Kneeling at the prow, Wycliffe still grasped the rope in one hand. The knot at the far end had snagged against the hinge of the shaft's doorway. "There's somebody else there! Look!" A glance over her shoulder, and through the sheets of rain, Sarah was able to make out a small figure standing just inside the entrance to the shaft, clinging to the edge. The little girl's face was filled with both awe and terror at her glimpse of the outside world's unlimited size and violence. "Who's that?" Wycliffe looked back at Sarah. "Who came up with you?" "Wait a minute." She turned her gaze from the child to the man at the boat's prow. "What are you talking about? Are you trying to tell me that you see her too?" "Right there!" A puzzled expression crossed Wycliffe's face before he pointed to the doorway. "Of course I see her. She's right there." "So do I," piped up Zwingli. He leaned forward from where he crouched beside Sarah. "I can see her. Who is she?" Sarah laughed. Head thrown back, throat exposed to the rain, even after all that had happened down in the Salander 3. The things she had seen both before and after her father's murderous apparition had shown itself to her. It still struck that this was a weird place to be having a conversation like this. Stuck out on a boat, she thought, in the middle of a storm that's going to drown us all. And these two idiots want to debate the existence of an unreal thing, a total hallucination. The laugh died when another realization struck her. She gazed slit-eyed at the man beside her, then at the other one. She wondered what they were trying to pull, what scheme was being forwarded by their claim of seeing the little girl. "She's my hallucination." They had no claim on the child. "All right, that's it." Sarah made a cut-off gesture with one hand. "I've really had enough of this." The boat pitched in the water, rising to the crest of another wave and dropping again, banging against the edge of the platform. She had to raise her voice even louder to make her words audible against the rush of the wind. "I don't know if this is part of some little plan of yours or what, but I'm not in the mood for it. You want to claim that you see a little girl there? Fine, go ahead. But you're not convincing me that you see her, because I know she's not real. But, Miss Tyrell, Wycliffe gestured toward the shaft's doorway. She's right there. She looked where he pointed and saw the Rachel child, just as she had known she would. The child's image and the sound of her breathing, even the scent of her dark hair, everything that worked to make the hallucination seem real, had come up with Sarah from the Salander 3, all the way along the storm-buffeted shaft to the surface of Scapa Flow. The child had said nothing, but had gazed up at Sarah with her big and sad dark eyes, seemingly aware that some change was coming in her existence, or non-existence, as Sarah had had to remind herself. Whatever part of her subconscious was responsible, in league with the influx of material from the ship's bottled-up past, it was certainly doing a thorough job. The illusory child hadn't remained as Sarah had perceived her down below, but had taken on the aspect of being caught out in a gale from the North Atlantic. Her clothes, soaked through, clung to her small body as her wet hair tangled across her brow, the braid even heavier and darker against her neck. The water that had trickled down her legs and from her ankles had collected in a pool around her feet, shimmered by the gusts of wind. "Look, just drop it, all right," Sarah spoke fiercely, drawing her arms tight around her body. "I'm cold and wet and tired, and believe me, I've seen enough of things that don't exist, including this little girl, which you can't see. Unless you're as crazy as I am. All right, so let's get back to shore immediately." "We're not going to leave her here." An obstinate expression formed on Wycliffe's face. "We can't." "I'm ordering you to. How's that?" Sarah shook her head in exasperation. "We can play whatever games you want to later on." Wycliffe made no reply. The waves had slackened a bit, enough for him to loosen one hand's grip on the platform's edge and extend it toward the image of the little girl. "Come on," he said to the non-existent child. "I've got you." A few seconds later, the apparition, who called herself Rachel, was in the boat, next to Sarah, a few feet away. Wycliffe stationed himself in the prow, watching as the wind and rain whipped into his face, as though he was concerned that Sarah might do some impossible harm to the child. The boat moved away from the triangular platform as Zwingli applied himself to the oars. "Some loyalists," she said darkly. "I thought you were supposed to do what I told you to, both of you." "I'm sure that," Wycliffe shrugged uncomfortably, "that you'll agree that this was the right thing to do when you've had a chance to reconsider." "I doubt it." Beside her, the Rachel child pressed closer, trying to get warm. She tucked Sarah's hand into both of hers, snuggling into the woman's ribs. "Well, I hope you're satisfied." Sarah looked down at the image. The child ignored the acid comment, rubbing the side of her face against Sarah's sleeve. "You're not even really here, and you pulled this one off." Once ashore, Wycliffe and Zwingli skipped the cathedral, even though it was closer. With the rain lashing at their backs, they led Sarah and the Rachel child back to the Shadow Corporation's interplanetary yacht. The breaks in the storm clouds let the stars' cold light through, enough to pick out the rocky edges of the trail. Ahead of them, the running lights and docking signals of the yacht glinted and blinked in sequence along the ovoid shape's circumference. Thank God, thought Sarah, as the gangway erised open. All she wanted now was another shower and a change of clothes. She had glanced down at herself as she and the others had trudged away from the little boat pulled up on the flow's pebbly shore. The palms of her hands were still stained with blood from when she had tripped and fallen, running from all that she had seen and feared inside the Salander 3. The rain hadn't managed to wash it away, nor had it taken the blood from the patch along one leg or the side where she had landed hard against her rib cage. There had been so much blood inside the ship that it had seemed to embed itself in every fabric of her being, like the canned and recirculated air drawn into her lungs. A half hour later, Sarah found herself wondering how many of the black undertaker suits Wycliffe and Zwingli had aboard the Shadow Corporation craft, while she had been in the Master Suite's facilities looking down through billows of gratefully received steam at the trickles of red sluicing off her body, thinning pink as they ran down the drain near her bare feet. The two men had managed to transform themselves back into the muted and dry personae in which she had first seen them, with the thick bathrobe pulled around herself, the Tyrell Corporation logo monogrammed over her breast. She sat down in the ship's central lounge, taking the largest and plushest of the chairs available. The two men had remained standing. She wondered how long they had been waiting for her to reappear, but one other figure was already there, sitting with her legs tucked up under her in one of the lesser wing chairs, which, with large grave eyes, the image of the little girl watched and waited. "You're still here?" Sarah had extracted a cigarette from the enameled case on the nearest small table. She lit the cigarette, inhaled, then let the gray smoke be carried away by the yacht's ventilation. So much quieter and unobtrusive than the ancient system she'd encountered at the bottom of Scapa Flow. "I thought, well, perhaps I hoped that you'd have gone away by now." The hot shower, taking away the chill that the storm winds had driven into her bones, had seemed so therapeutic that a diminishing of hallucinations had not seemed entirely unlikely. "You know, this could become quite tiresome. You're not really needed anymore." "I'm not going away." The little girl's face darkened with her stubborn defiance. "And you can't make me." "We'll see about that." Sarah regarded the glowing tip of the cigarette. "There are ways. These things can always be accomplished, one way or another. She'd have to look into it when there was time, or if." A fatalistic calm had settled over her, part fatigue, part resigned acknowledgement of the meshing of the universe's gears. Even if, say, psychotherapy didn't work, drugs might, or surgery, perhaps. She nodded slowly, as though contemplating the possibility, though it was technically easier to get material in and out of the brains of replicants. The whole system of control through the implantation of false memories was a Tyrell Corporation development. It could be done, to a limited degree, with humans as well. Sarah imagined that a sufficiently skilled neurosurgeon could root around inside her skull with his microscalpels and tiny electrified probes and root out whatever lump of gray matter contained the little girl's image. Or there might be even simpler ways. The ultimate surgery. "I could just kill myself." Sarah enunciated the words clearly, with no hesitation attached to them. She had considered the option enough times to render it free of pain. Then you would disappear, wouldn't you? If I blew a hole in the side of my head, you could just flutter out and be gone. Miss Tyrell, for heaven's sake. Wycliffe had turned pale. Don't say things like that. Why? Will it blow up the franchise or something? When all else had failed, there was still some sadistic pleasure to be gotten out of needling the die-hard loyalists. I nearly forgot. Without me, your chances of resurrecting the Tyrell Corporation are just about zero. A suicide would ball up your plans, wouldn't it? All this work for nothing. It's more than that, insisted Wycliffe. There's a certain matter of personal loyalty. He's right, Zwingli added his voice to the statement. Since there really is no difference between you and the corporation, that makes it sort of a liege-vassal relationship. It didn't sound like that out there on the flow. Sarah nodded toward one of the viewports, through which the storm-lashed waters could be seen. You weren't exactly taking orders from me when I told you to leave behind this. She gestured in the direction of Rachel. Child, apparition, or whatever, that you claim to see. I'm not, announced Rachel sullenly, an apparition. I know what that word means. Miss Tyrell, if it would do any good, Wycliffe sounded desperate, we'd be happy to pretend we don't see any child sitting here with us. You could order us to do that. What child? Asked Zwingli helpfully. He watched Sarah for an approving reaction. But it really wouldn't change anything. Hands spread apart, Wycliffe hunched up his shoulders. We'd still see her. And since she did come with you out of the Salander 3, it's vitally important that we get whatever information we can from her, whether she's an apparition or not. You people must be crazy. The Rachel child turned a withering look on all of them. Sitting back in the wing chair, she folded her arms across her chest. An apparition is something that doesn't exist. The nanny told me all about it. Because there were plenty of apparitions down there, I was told to be very careful about them, because even if they don't exist, they can still hurt you. Truer words, said Sarah dryly, were never spoken. She flicked gray ash onto the lounge's carpet. Though in this case, I'm not much worried. Perhaps we could settle this later? Wycliffe looked both fretful and conciliatory. When you're not quite so worn out from your efforts, Miss Tyrell? You mean when I'm not feeling cranky? About you two claiming you can see my hallucination? She was still wondering, or worse, coming to conclusions about what they were trying to accomplish with that bit. Whatever. But there really is some time pressure here, Miss Tyrell. We'd like to debrief you about what you encountered down in the Salander 3 while the memories are still fresh. She laughed, holding the half-drawn cigarette off to one side. They're not exactly the kind that fade, believe me. Every detail, persisted Wycliffe, might be important if the Tyrell Corporation is to be brought back to what it was before. We need to know. Sometimes, I think I must be working for you instead of the other way around. Wycliffe stiffened to his full, funereal height. We are all in the service of the Tyrell Corporation. Really? She smiled as she regarded him. pompous twit, though she supposed it was ever thus with religious fanatics. No sense of humor at all. A good thing for him that he hadn't been the one to enter the scuttled Salander 3. He wouldn't have made it back out alive, or with even as much sanity as she'd retained intact, because that moment had come while she had been down there with all the mass of the ocean on top of her and the even more crushing and airless weight of the past sealed around, that it had seemed to last like a joke, a hard and cruel one, but a joke nevertheless. That she had gone all that way, a complete round trip to the place and frozen time of her infancy, just so the one who would have killed her so long ago could have another chance at her. It must have seemed so very accommodating of me, thought Sarah. She breathed out smoke, tilting her head back and watching the insubstantial, disappearing shape it made. All the murderous ghosts of the past. If they dreamed, it would have to be of death. They couldn't die themselves, not while the past endured unbroken, sealed tight within its bottle, away from the real world and real time. But as the little girl had said, even if they don't exist, they can still hurt you. Miss Tyrell? Wyclif's voice poked at the edge of her awareness. She brought herself the rest of the way back from the Salander 3's world, the replica of it inside her head. Very well. Sarah ground out the cigarette stub in the green-veined malachite bowl beside her. What do you want to know? A smile below half-lidded eyes directed in turn at Zwingli and Wycliffe. What do you want me to tell you? You don't have to tell us anything other than the truth. Wycliffe appeared as if he had won some obscure debating point. What you saw. What happened to you. Everything that happened down there. Kill them all, thought Sarah. Her eyelids went all the way closed, and let God sort them out. She heard the child's voice piping up. There were bad things, the ones that are always there. That's what she saw. Yes, said Sarah, nodding. She opened her eyes and gazed at the two men watching her. That's what I saw. The things that are always there. Her thin smile became laughter that she couldn't help from tearing her throat. Excuse me, but it's really very funny. Are you all right? Zwingli spoke, sounding genuinely concerned. Can I get you something? No, it's all right. Sarah gestured with one hand. It just struck me that I solved the mystery. Mystery? From inside his jacket, Wycliffe had taken out a small notepad. He glanced up from the few words he had scribbled. What mystery is that? Is there more than one? She brushed a tear away from the corner of her eye. The cat, of course. I found out what happened to the cat. Cat? The stylus remained poised on the notes. The one that my parents took with them. The official pet of the Salander 3 expedition. You must have seen it in the old news photos, in the company files. A big, fluffy, marmalade cat. Ginger, said the image of the little girl, sitting forward in the wing chair. That's what its name was. That was what my mother called it. The nanny told me so. Miss Tyrell, when I said that everything could be important, I might have misspoken. Wycliffe tapped the stylus on the notepad. The cat, and yes, I do remember seeing it in the old photos, that actually might not be critical to our mission. If the cat is alive and well down there, that's wonderful, but really hardly alive. She glared at the man, and it probably wasn't too well when it died, though that probably didn't take too long from the looks of what I found. Her voice turned flat and grim. It wasn't that big a cat when it was alive, when Anson and Ruth Tyrell took it aboard and they all went sailing off toward the Proxima system. But it's amazing how large an area an ordinary domestic house cat can cover when somebody puts their mind to it. She looked down at her hands, which she had spent so much time scrubbing clean in the shower, long after the red marks had swirled down the drain. And somebody did. Miss Tyrell? Be quiet, she snapped. You wanted to know everything. You don't get to pick and choose now. Sarah let her voice drop to a whisper. We were running, the little girl and I, because we were scared, because we had seen the bad things. They had come right out and spoken to us. They had told us what they wanted to do. That's why we were scared. And it was dark. There are some very dark places down there, and I tripped and fell. I had Rachel by the hand. She was running to keep up with me, and then she almost fell too. But I didn't, said the girl. That's right. You didn't, Sarah nodded, because you knew. For a moment she wondered how a piece of her own subconscious could know something that she herself wouldn't have been able to know, but she let the thought pass away. You knew your way around. You knew what else was down there. I didn't. That's why I fell. On the cat, or what was left of it. She paused, looking from one man's face to the other's, gauging their reactions. Why they should be so queasy about the death of a cat that had happened over 2 decades ago. She supposed their reaction was due to the closeness of detail. The deaths of so many people in the apocalypse of the Tyrell Corporation's LA headquarters. Hundreds. Thousands. She had never bothered to find out the exact number. They didn't matter. The person who did it, continued Sarah, must have been very thorough. From the evidence, it's one thing to just make a mess. Anyone can do that. But to have a certain artistic sense, that's almost as admirable as it is evil. Under her breastbone was a cold, hard stone where her heart should be. Sarah knew that she wouldn't be able to speak like this otherwise. I wouldn't even be able to live. Not anymore. I don't suppose the cat would have suffered too long. It wouldn't have been able to. It would have to have died at some point early on in the process. So it wasn't done for the cat's sake. Or at least no more so than was necessary. For whom, then? Wyclif's voice was nearly as soft as hers. And who did it? Who did it? My father, of course, Anson Tyrell. A shake of her head, as though chiding the one who had spoken. And don't pretend that comes as so much of a shock to you. I have a feeling that you both knew, perhaps the whole Shadow Corporation knows, just what happened aboard the Salander 3. About my father's insanity and his homicidal rampage. You all knew. Perhaps you were the ones who erased any mention of it from the company files, so that I wouldn't know. Wycliffe and Zwingli exchanged glances with each other, but said nothing. That was enough for Sarah to know that she had surmised correctly. Don't worry about it, she said, amused by the flicker of panic she had seen in the men's eyes. I'm sure you and the others did it for the absolute highest of reasons. It was to protect you, Zwingli blurted out the words. Really? Of course it was. If I didn't know what had happened when I was just an infant in my mother's arms, all those things of which I was supposedly too young to have formed memories, then I wouldn't have bad dreams, would I? How thoughtful of you. And naturally, I wouldn't be quite so resistant to your plans for resurrecting the Tyrell Corporation as I might have been if I already knew what was in the Salander 3. You might not have been able to talk me into going down there. That's not quite fair, said Wycliffe. As you've said before, without you there is no Tyrell Corporation. The opposite can be said as well. You don't exist, or you can't for much longer unless the corporation comes back from the shadows. Any subterfuge was as much for your benefit as ours, and as it happens, there are only the slightest, fragmentary records of what might have happened during the Salander 3's final expedition. A few transcripts of statement made by the company employees who went aboard the ship after it had returned to Earth, and most of those had been severely edited or destroyed before anyone from the Shadow Corporation would have had a chance to access them. You have to give my uncle credit for his thoroughness, all right? Sarah felt her face hardening. God forbid anything should besmirch the Tyrell Corporation's public image. Eldon Tyrell might have had motivations beyond that. Wycliffe shrugged and spread his large, jointed hands apart. If things are as you found them inside the Salander 3, and we have no reason to doubt you on that score, that it might not have been for the company's sake that Dr. Tyrell acted as he did in suppressing this information. It might have been for the family name. Oh, and there's a difference, Sarah raised one eyebrow, between the family and the corporation. Not much, admittedly, let us say, than for your father's sake, and the way he was remembered. Anson Tyrell wasn't a psychotic murderer when he left on the Salander 3's expedition. Whatever happened to him aboard the ship, it happened out there. One of Wycliffe's bony fingers pointed upward, to the night sky beyond the yacht's contained spaces. Something happened that made him do what he did. You said murderer. That was the word you used. Sarah's narrowed gaze fastened onto the man. People don't say murderer when they're talking about a cat getting eviscerated and hung around a room like a Christmas garland. One of her hands balled into a fist, knuckles as white as those she had seen through the blood smeared on her father's hand. Perhaps psychotic, that's easy enough, but not the other. Wycliffe's mouth opened, but snapped shut again before any words came out. I caught you out on that one, said Sarah with grim satisfaction. I haven't told you yet about the other things I saw down there. The really bad things, chimed in the little girl sitting in the wing chair. Not just some stupid old cat. Ah, yes, exactly so. Wycliffe attempted a feeble smile. I must have been anticipating what you are about to tell us. I don't think so. She lifted the lid of the ornate box on the small table beside the chair and watched her hand run a fingertip across the cigarette's silky paper before turning her gaze back to the two men. I think you knew very well that my father didn't stop with the cat when he had his psychotic breakdown. Somewhere between here and the Proxima system. He didn't go just a little bit crazy. He went all the way. There were some indications about that. Sarah slapped the box slid down. Gentlemen, I found more than indications. I found my mother's body, or what was left of it. Perhaps for my father, the cat had just been a little warm-up, a practice session to get ready for the main event, which was my mother. One fingertip ticked against the box lid. And myself. That would seem to be consistent. Wycliffe's hands folded around each other. With the fragmentary reports of those who went aboard the Salander 3 when it returned to Earth, he gave a single nod. It's fortunate, of course, that Anson Tyrell didn't manage to fulfill his deranged agenda. Oh, I agree. She made no attempt to disguise her sarcasm. I doubt that even when I was an infant, I would have enjoyed those particular attentions of my father. You see, I've been inside his head. That's what the Salander 3 is now, with all that toxic past locked up and unchanging inside it. It's like that Jungian definition of the psychotic condition, as that state where no new thing ever enters into a person's thoughts, just the same thing over and over again, like an endless tape loop. And that thing in my father's case was murder and blood, lots of it, more than what's inside a cat or what was inside my mother. Sarah's voice grated rawer and tighter. An ocean of it. That must have been what the inside of his head looked like before he died. Just big, hollow spaces like the ones inside the Salander 3, washed with blood. Was your mother? Zwingli's words came out in a stammer. Had he done the same thing to her, like he did to the cat? No, a shake of the head. That didn't happen, from what I could tell. He slashed her throat. And then her own words came slower and slower, close to halting. He stopped there. That's not the whole story, the Rachel child spoke up, her voice hard with scorn. She's not telling it right. Gripping the arms of the wing chair, the little girl looked around at Wycliffe and Zwingli in turn. And she even saw what happened. She saw it. Wycliffe turned from the child back toward Sarah. Miss Tyrell? What did you see? What happened? The tape loop inside her head. That segment of the long buried past that had wormed its way into her own memories became visible once more as she closed her eyes. It would never go away. Once seen, it was as unending as it had been in the hulk of the Salander 3. What happened? She spoke without raising her eyelids to admit the lounge's softly filtered light. Even that was too much for her now. I saw her, my mother, Ruth Tyrell, whatever you want to call her. It doesn't matter. She was running too. She was running with the baby in her arms because she knew what he wanted to do. That's the real story. From somewhere outside Sarah, the little girl's voice spoke again, approvingly this time. That's what really happened. I know, because the nanny told me. Because when I saw those things happening over and over again, they scared me. I wanted to know, so I wouldn't be scared anymore. So the nanny told me who they were. Sarah waited until the child was finished speaking, without even wondering if the two men could hear those words or not. The infant. That was me, she spoke slowly, trying to get everything exactly right, as if that could help somehow. And then he caught her. He caught up with my mother, his wife, Ruth and Anson. Her voice trailed away. Go on, Miss Tyrell. We have to know everything. There's not much more, is there? She sighed and shook her head, opening her eyes to look up at the radiant ceiling. My father knew his way around the Salander 3 better than my mother did, so there was really no place for her to hide. Plus, she had the baby. She had me with her. Plus, you can't ever get away from the really bad things, whether they exist or not. Eventually, they catch up with you, the way my father caught up with her. Nothing but silence surrounded her. They were all waiting for her to go on. Those poor ghosts, thought Sarah. For a few seconds, she wasn't sure who she meant. The people here, in the richly appointed lounge of the Shadow Corporation's interplanetary yacht. They didn't seem any more real to her than the figures she had seen down at the bottom of Scapa Flow, acting out their endless, time-stilled rituals of fear and madness and death. They might not even know they're dead. She supposed that statement might apply to the ones here as well. In a way, the only one that did appear real to her was the hallucinated Rachel child. At least that one had come out of her head, up from her unlit subconscious, the same way Sarah herself had come up from the sunken ship. So she's at least as real as I am. That wasn't saying much. Maybe just a little bit real, perhaps. As if on cue, the child spoke again. He cut her throat. A simple announcement. That's what he did. He had a knife and he cut her throat. Just like that. The girl made a quick swooping gesture, one hand holding an invisible blade. And she died. Sarah didn't wait for the two men to ask what happened next. And then, she said, so did he. My father died. The tape loop inside her head had run to its end and started over. One moment of the past welded inexorably to its antecedent. He had his dead wife at his feet, and a wailing infant lying in the pool of blood on the floor. She had watched all that, with the hallucinated Rachel child close beside her. The two of them pulled back into the shadows of one of the ship's unlit corridors, as the ghosts, locked in time, had gone through their rituals in the light, as though they were the ones who existed outside of memory. There was something else that she didn't speak of. Not because she didn't want Wycliffe and Zwingli to know. It was just too painful to try to find the words. That her mother had died shielding her, protecting the infant in her arms, even when the crazed figure with the knife had taken her mother down to her knees, his other hand twisting her hair tight into his fist, drawing her throat taut and vulnerable. Even then, Ruth Tyrell hadn't screamed, but had gasped out a plea, not for her own life, but for the smaller one she'd held desperately against her breast. Desperate because Ruth had known, as her daughter, Sarah, had known, when she had seen the madness in her long-dead father's eyes, that the child, the infant in her mother's arms, had been the true target of his wrath. He'd murdered his wife, drawn the knife across her white throat, only to get at his own child. But he didn't. Sarah spoke her thoughts aloud. She didn't care whether anyone else heard them. For a moment, he wasn't crazy, and that was all it took. He must have heard what she said to him, what Ruth had said. Sarah watched from the dark corridor, hadn't been able to make out the words her mother had spoken, words in a ghost's mouth. Perhaps they hadn't even been words at all, but just some inarticulate cry. Or articulate enough for that brief section of the past that had happened so long ago and so far from Earth. 1/6 of the way to the Proxima system. For just that long, a matter of a few seconds, Anson Tyrell had been sane again. Whatever gripped him had relaxed its hold, letting a horrified rationality possess him once more. He had his dead wife at his feet, the blood still running from her open throat and pooling around the two of them, forming a redly shining mirror in which he looked down and saw his own unrecognizable face, and saw the knife in his upraised hand, which he might not even have known was there. He'd been that crazy. And saw his face in that smaller red mirror, the one smeared on the blade's bright metal, and recognized. That was how it had appeared to Sarah, watching the ghosts, who were so locked into the past that she would have seemed like a ghost to them if she had stepped out of the dark corridor, if they had been able to see her at all. Sarah's time that she was locked into and that she carried around separated out from the time held in the Salander 3, like the markings of trace elements divided by their specific gravity. Those elements, her time and the ghost's time, had been swirled together for a little while when she had first descended and entered the transport, so that the elements had bumped up against each other, become visible to each other, the dead looking at the living, or at least the not so dead. Her dead father had been able to see her, had probably thought she was one more part of the craziness sparking away inside his head. Would he have been able to do more than just look at her and say crazy, murderous things? She didn't know. She didn't know that had been when she had turned and ran, snatching up the Rachel child by the hand and pulling her along after herself, not caring that the child was even less real than her dead father. "And then your father killed himself?" She didn't know which of the men had spoken. That's right. She supposed that was something else of which they had been aware all along. Another little fragment left in the company records, transcribed from one of the employees who had gone aboard the returned Salander 3. What else they found? The two corpses with slashed throats, the knife still in Anson Tyrell's hand. When he was sane again, and he could see what he had done, he used the same knife on himself. That kind of grief, she knew, being another sort of insanity, or else it was being really, truly sane at last. It all had the same results. He didn't worry about the infant lying in the pool of blood, wailing away and kicking its little feet. He knew that the Salander 3's computer and all its built-in autonomic machinery would take care of me, better than he would be able to. That's what it was designed for, especially since he had no way of knowing how long he would stay sane. The craziness had come over him like a storm, and it had passed. But it might come again. Better to let the ship bathe and feed and comfort this child. And bring it back to Earth, said Wycliffe. Bring you back. The Salander 3's return program wouldn't have kicked in while your father was still alive. The computer only went into autopilot when it could no longer detect any adult human presences aboard. There was some small comfort to be had from that. Sarah felt cold and empty. The hard bravado she had been displaying now worn thin. As though the warmth of the yacht's lounge had failed to reach the bones chilled by the ocean storm. Still, she thought, as she gazed at the elaborate marquetry of the cigarette box's lid, and did not see it. Still, he was trying to protect me, the only way he could, from all the bad, crazy things, from himself. But we don't know why he did it. What could have caused Anson Tyrell to go mad? Sarah looked up and saw the two men in conference, heads leaning toward each other, voices lowered, but not to whispers, as though they had simply put her presence out of their minds for a moment. Between them, seated in the wing chair, her hallucination of the Rachel child looked up at them, following their conversation like a tennis spectator. "That's true," replied Zwingli. He nodded thoughtfully. "We have more details, but not really any more information, not that we can use." "That's the problem." Behind the square-rimmed glasses, Wycleffe's eyes seemed to focus on his own deep considerations. "To have come all this way." "Yes," as though in a slightly distorted mirror, Zwingli's gaze looked the same, complete to the spectacles exactly like those of the late Eldon Tyrell. "It seems a shame." Wycliffe remained silent, lips pursed in thought. "Do you really suppose we could? I mean, ask her to do that?" "Ask me to do what?" Sarah heard her own voice cut across the yacht's lounge. "What are you two talking about?" We wouldn't ask it of you, Miss Tyrell." Wycliffe raised and spread his hands. "If it weren't so absolutely critical to our mission." "That's right." Zwingli nodded vigorously. "We're really only thinking about the ultimate fate of the Tyrell Corporation." "I bet." A bitter taste formed on Sarah's tongue. "You want me to go back down there? Back down to the Salander 3. I didn't bring back enough information with me on that last trip. Not enough to suit you, at any rate." "As I said," Wycliffe made an attempt at looking apologetic. "Only because it's so crucial. That's the only reason. You understand that, don't you?" "Oh, I understand all right." Sarah stood up from the chair. She pulled the robe tighter around herself, grabbing the dangling ends of the belt and cinching it hard at her waist. "And as you also said," she could feel the stiffer embroidery of the company logo against her skin, just above her heartbeat. "Without the Tyrell Corporation, I'm nothing. So I really don't have much choice in the matter." "That's rather a harsh way of looking at it." "Stuff it. You're supposed to be working for me, and I don't need your lectures." Sarah held out her hand, palm upward. "You promised me something, back on Mars, and I haven't gotten it yet." Wycliffe looked puzzled. "Promised you what?" "A gun. Another one, to replace the one I had." two men exchanged nervous glances. "Don't worry about it, for Christ's sake." Sarah shook her head in disgust. "It'll be all right." "Miss Tyrell, that might not be such a good idea. Not right now." She glared at Wycliffe. "You mean not after I've been talking about killing myself?" "Well, look, you want me to go back down there, then give me the gun, because I'm not going to go down there without it." A faint smile showed on Zwingli's face. "A gun wouldn't help you. Not there. Not with those kinds of things." "I don't care about that." Sarah kept her hand extended in the same position. "Give me the gun, or you can kiss off getting anything more from the Salander 3. Wycliffe's owlish gaze regarded her for a few moments longer. Then he turned and walked over to the cabinets at the far end of the lounge, extracting a ring of keys from his pocket as he went. He came back with a large black object in one hand. "Here you are," he said stiffly, "as you requested." She examined the gun, turning it from side to side. It was bigger and heavier than the one she'd had back on Mars. "That should do." "How do I know that it's loaded?" Sarah held it at arm's length, sighting along her wrist and down the weapon's massive barrel. "Or that it works at all? Maybe it's a dummy, just some prop you got ready for me." A sigh from Wycliffe. "It's loaded. We keep them that way. I need to test it before I go back down there." He glanced toward one of the lounge's dark-filled viewports. "Perhaps when the storm is over, in the morning, then you could go outside with it?" "No." Sarah shook her head. "I don't have to go outside." Arms still extended, she swiveled the gun around. "Not at all." The bullet caught Wycliffe in his chest, sending him aloft, arms spread wide, as though he were falling back into some invisible bed just behind him. He landed in a crumpled mass at Zwingli's feet. The other man looked down at his partner's corpse, then back up at Sarah, eyes wider behind the square glasses than they had ever seen before. "This is too easy." The echo from the first shot was still rolling around the space as she pulled the trigger once more. They must have wanted it this way. She didn't care whether they had or not. "Gosh!" The Rachel child had gotten out of the wing chair and had gone over to look at the two bodies, one lying on top of the other. The Eldon Tyrell memorial glasses gazed blankly at the lounge's ceiling. "What's going to happen now?" Unfazed, the child looked over at Sarah. She set the gun down on the small table, then extracted a cigarette from the ornate box. "I've got other business to take care of." Sarah slipped the lighter into the robe's pocket. "Far from here." Tilting her head back, she exhaled smoke. "Unfinished business." "Can I come with you?" A shrug. It didn't matter to her. The little girl didn't really exist, and for all practical purposes, the two die-hard loyalists had stopped existing as well. She was alone. "Sure." She turned and started back to the master suite to finish dressing before going up and setting the yacht's course. Back to Mars and Deckard. She wondered idly how he'd react when he saw her again. "I'll know soon enough." "Don't fade away on my account." Sarah glanced over her shoulder at the image of the little girl. "Stick around as long as you like."